Hi, I'm Steve. Welcome to my shop. Today's episode, we're going to continue with a series of getting the most from your slider, and we're going to cover the dado operation. I will demonstrate how the two methods that I use to do dados. There's probably a third method, but I typically don't use that because the tooling I have just isn't really all that compatible with this saw. At least I think that's the problem. So let's get to it, and I'll show you the first method. This is my most frequently used method. This method is unique to the Martin T60 saw. Your saw, if you've got computer-aided tools in it, it may be useful to you. Your saw may have a similar feature. If you don't have a computerized saw, then you're probably going to be, this first section isn't going to have a whole lot of use to you. I'm just going to demonstrate it because it's what I have. The dado tool. So I'm going to make my dado 14.6 millimeters wide, which obviously my saw blade with a 3.2 millimeter kerf isn't going to make this in a single pass. So this will be a multi-pass operation. All right, why don't I just change that to 20. And well, let's make this about 1/4 inch deep, so it's 6.4 millimeters. So the next step is I'll just press start. And the next thing I need to do is set the rip fence for the first setting, which it's over 500 millimeters that way. So what I'll do now is I'll unlock the rip fence and position it to where it is 20 millimeters away. I went too far there. And now I'm ready to make my first pass. Okay, it didn't look like it needed to make that last pass because it had already been cleaned out, so let's see how this looks. So let's say that turned out to be a pretty good fit. Now let's go on to method 2, where I show the stacked dado head cutter. And this is pretty much the view you'll see on most European style sliding table saws. First thing I want to do is pull out the riving knife. And then I'm going to move this riving knife mount all the way to the back, just so I can get more room for the blade, not have that handle interfere, because normally with the riving knife in, the handle will be pointing back to the rear. What you'll see here, there's a spacer plate in here, and on this saw they call it a cheese plate. It's held in place by 4 screws. The arbor for this saw is 30 millimeters, and it's got 2 pins here. And these pins are to keep the blade from loosening the arbor nut when the brake engages in the saw when you shut it down. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to break these cheese plate screws loose. And it kind of helps to have a ball-end driver. And this cheese plate is approximately 7 millimeters thick. Now this particular saw does not, it will only accept a maximum tool width of, I think it's either 15 millimeters or 15 and a half. Regardless, what I have doesn't go that high, or that thick. So now that I've got the screws out, the cheese plate comes off. And then I'll just set that over to the side. The next thing I need to do is to remove or replace the throat plate with the dado throat plate. Then I've got the dado insert. Just put that in place here. This is a bit more of a time-consuming setup to set up for a dado on a slider than it is a standard cabinet saw. So that's probably one of the reasons I really don't do this very often. The dado set that I've got is it's a Forrest, and what it's called, it's their box joint cutter. Because the thickness of the cheese plate that I just pulled off is greater than the thickness of these 2 plates combined, so I put a 2 millimeter spacer in, because otherwise I'll never be able to tighten this up. So I'm going to set this up for a 1/4 inch groove, except I've got a spacer in there, 2 millimeter. So instead of a 1/4 inch, it's going to be 1/4 inch plus 2 millimeters. And nominally this should get me about, just shy of 7.5 millimeters. Now my chip flap's closed and I'm ready to do the dado. What I'm going to use the outrigger and the crosscut stop fence in order to make this next dado. We'll make it 75 millimeters from the end. So how do I do that? Because my cheese plate's gone, my saw blade is wider than a normal kerf and it's further toward the rip fence side. The calibrations on my stop cut, on my crosscut fence, are all not accurate. The first thing I want to do is establish and give me a de facto recalibration of my stop setting. And I'm going to show you, let me get set up here, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my workpiece, or a workpiece, and I'm just going to get a reference point for the length of piece that I'm going to cut the dado in off of the saw blade. And I'll bring the camera up here and show you that later. So I've got the end of my workpiece against the outside of the dado stack, and I've got the opposite end on this stop. And then I'm into the stop here. And then here is, right now the stop, the crosscut stop is in what's called absolute mode. But this reading of 608.5 is not the actual reading, it's actually calibrated because it's calibrated to a different blade position. So what I need to do is press this. This is one of the advantages of having a digital stop display, is that you can go to what's called an incremental mode. And when I do that, I've just established a 0. And the 0 is actually the opposite end of my workpiece that is to the this side of the dado stack. It's kind of rare for me to reference off of this side of the blade. If for some reason you wanted to establish your 0 and reference the opposite side of the dado stack, here's what I do. And you can take, it doesn't matter, any thin piece of stock or actually thick piece of stock. It just needs to be of uniform thickness. And I'll put that up against my rip fence. And then what I want to do is just kind of hold that in place and bring it up to where it contacts the far side of the dado stack. And that's going to be, you can take your workpiece, clear the blade. I'll just push the workpiece up here, reset my stop, and then press, come out of absolute, or go back into absolute mode and back into incremental, and now I've just re-established my 0 as the far side of the blade. So that's the way I reference to the opposite side. Okay, so here's what I'm going to want. I'm going to want a dado in that same workpiece we did before, that's where that side is 75 millimeters from the end. That's where my stop is currently calibrated. So what I like to do is work these stop settings out in advance. So my first setting will be minus 75 because I need to move my stop toward the rip fence. So that's my first setting. My second setting, since my stop's calibrated to that end, I could recalibrate it using the incremental mode and make the second pass. And I could do that, but let's see how this works mathematically. I know the kerf of my dado stack is 7.5 millimeters. So what I want from this side, I want 14.6, so I know that that needs to be 75 plus 14.6, and that should be 89.6. But I have to subtract my kerf, which is minus 7.5 from that. So I need my second stop setting to be minus 82.1. So let's do it. Okay, my first setting for this setup will be 75 millimeters. minus 75 millimeters. Right now I'm at plus 35. The fence is loose. So I'm going to set this to minus 75. I'm going to lock the fence and use the fine adjust feature. So I'm at minus 75 millimeters. I'll make the first cut. Pine splinters quite a bit. So I thank you for watching this episode on dados on the slider. Again, it's not my favorite activity. It's something I don't do very often because I think there's just probably more efficient methods to do it, but obviously you can get extremely accurate results. The downside to the slider, it is a bit more time consuming to set up than it was a cabinet saw, which is pull your throat plate out, slap your dado stack on, and pull out your ruler and go. This one, it's just a little more effort to do that. So I appreciate your likes, your subscriptions, and your views. Thank you. Have a great day.